What's up, everybody? It's Mike Flex here at 7 Studios, and today we're going to take a look at using GLSL code inside of Smode for live procedural real-time visuals using your GPU. Let's take a look. Here we are inside of Smode, and if you right-click over in the layer panel here, you'll create a context menu. If you go to 2D layers, down at the bottom, there's ISF Generator and Shader. Let's just create where it says Shader to get our basic idea here. You'll see that some code was generated in this text box down in the bottom center of the screen, and that is coming from a shader tab. You can see that reflected here in the name shader, and you can see in the main view screen what that code is generating. So I won't go too much into the detail of how the code works, but this is very, very simple code that's applying color procedurally to the screen and creating what you see here. So by altering these numbers, very basically, let's just change this to 2 and tap Control Enter. Maybe we'll get something different out of it. Let's try some more. I'm not really changing it enough. Let's multiply this times 2. There we go. So just by changing a single number in the code, I was able to alter what we're seeing here. And by defining certain parameters within that code to be assignable to, say, a MIDI slider, you would then have an ability to interact with that thing live. So animating a parameter can be as simple as applying, let's say, a sine function to it, which would mean that it would go down and up and down through a certain value range that you assign. So the power of GLSL code is unbelievable, and the only thing you need to do to have your mind blown by GLSL is to go and take a look here at Shadertoy. So ISF is going to be the first thing I'm going to show you, and then we're going to move on to Shadertoy. But this thing that you're seeing move in my screen here, if I just maybe go to full screen it, this is running off of just lines of code in my web browser. So I'm going to back out of it with escape. And if you take a look over here at the code, not only is this guy super friendly, this particular guy that made this really cool one, he comments all the way through his code. And if you really want to dive deep and you want to learn how code works and you want to learn how just a bunch of words creates this thing that you're seeing here, it's really, really not hard to start pulling things apart and creating your own. And the concept of this website that we're at right now, Shadertoy, is that you can easily duplicate this guy's scene file, create your own, change some parameters around, and everyone comments on everybody else's stuff. And it's just moving the industry forward on a really interesting community level on the back end. So a lot of the people that come into this Shadertoy community are coming from the old Winamp milk drop days and things of that nature. So using coding shaders is not new. It's been around since probably the 90s. I don't know really when it first debuted. Maybe I should look into that. But by going and copying and pasting this guy's code and bringing it into Smode, you can have this live in real time, and then you can adjust anything about it if you know what you're adjusting. And you can assign any of the parameters to, like I said, say audio reactivity or a slider on your APC or something along those lines. You can also use OSC within Smode, so if you've got some device that's sending out OSC signals, you could hypothetically power these shaders. Now, why is this exciting? Why is this even worth looking at? Because it looks kind of like it's looping. Well, it's not looping at all, number one. It's completely unique every single moment, but you can go and change it, and you can animate it, and you're not stuck with this stock thing. So you do require more GPU power, but these days we all have some pretty beefed out GPUs inside of our machines, or in the case of people that have been doing this for a while, we have multiple machines, and you can actually daisy chain those machines and use things like NDI and or Spout to get graphics from program A into program B. So there's a couple programs out there that will allow you to host a shader file inside them and play it back live, but Smode's really the handiest one because it's got so many other features, and you can put it in a stack with a bunch of other stuff and fade it in and out between other scenes, and a lot of really advanced stuff that I don't believe you can do with any other program. And I use them all, so I've yet to discover something this powerful. So let's just back it down real quick before we get into Shadertoy, and I want to show you ISF. Video, I suppose. Yep, here we go. So ISF stands for Interactive Shader Format, and create interactive shaders to use on desktop, mobile, and in the browser. So you can see here in the screen that there's some sliders, and by moving those sliders around, I can get different effects out of the graphics that are being generated, and you can see I have, full control over what is and isn't happening there. So assigning that to, say, like this slider to the sound of my voice or something like that, it's not really doable here in the browser. They might have a function for that, but I'm not looking. And in Smode, you would basically assign your audio input function to that, just like you would assign to any other basic function in Smode. And that's super, super easy. So the reason I'm showing you ISF is pretty much a step forward from just basic GLSL, and it's made to have what's called these exposed parameters over here, and those are the things that you can assign to audio FFT and or your controller sliders or OSC or what have you. So you can create some really, really fun stuff. And if we now take a look back in Smode itself, you'll see that if we right click in the center, go to 2D layers, and go down to the ISF Generator, that we can create a bunch of preset ISFs that they've included with Smode, and that's really nice of them. Some of them are still non-moving, some of them are animated, and then they have ones that say advanced. And a lot of the advanced ones have exposed parameters, so let's just take a look at one of them. Let's go to cosplay. And if I click on cosplay, you get a circle of dots. And, that's not really exciting. Okay, Mike, why are you showing us that? Well, every individual shader file has its own timeline. And, we'll just get into it so I don't have to try to explain the technicalities of it. And if you go down here in the properties panel for the item that you just created, which is just a preset fragment shader, which is a bunch of code that you're seeing here, we can click over on the properties panel this word play standalone. And what that does is it's going to automatically create a timeline just for this shader and separate of the main timeline. And that means that you're going to actually have control over the speed at which this timeline plays back. And that is a really, really fun thing to play around with, especially if you assign that to a slider or anything like that. So let's just click play standalone, and lo and behold, it starts moving. Now, the very first thing that it's doing is already likely not going to loop very commonly to the degree that you would notice the loop. So it's its own content as is, and that's really cool. And you can send it out with spout or NDI, with or without alpha, over into something like Resolume and use it as a layer there, add all your effects there. You can also add effects here within. And since we're still talking IFS, let's just right click again, and if you come down a little bit to where it says ISF modifier here, it's funny, it's down in the effects area rather than up in the area where you can create stuff that shows up in the scene. This whole second row is all effects that you can apply, and one of them are ISF modifiers. So let's just hover over here, and you can see that they were pretty nice, and they included at least 100, if not more, maybe 150 modifier presets. And what's a modifier? It's just an effect for the screen made from this code. So it's the same as any other effect that you could add, but you're also going to be able to see inside of it and what makes it tick and change it all around yourself, or assign those parameters to, again, sliders and audio FFT, which is the whole point of what we're looking at right now. So we haven't got there yet, but we're getting there. So this first shader is contained within itself. It's a text file that's generating what we're seeing here, which looks pretty cool already. Now, if we just go to stylize, for example, and we add in, glitch ship echo trace. I don't know what all these ones do because I haven't used every single one of them, but a lot of them are cool. Some of them are kind of wonky, but you can always just come in and play around with these on the most basic images. I'm not even kidding you. You can get great stuff. So if I just add echo trace on top of this, you're going to see what parameters were exposed over in your properties panel. And I can see that there's a threshold. And if I turn that threshold up, look at that. We're getting traces, and I've got like a generative kaleidoscope right there, right? And I'm just kind of pulling the value back down, which is why it's jumping away. But so that's pretty cool. You can, generate your own trails in that way. And because you have a separate layer for that, you'll see that there's actually a opacity slider over here in the layer panel. And if I pull that down, that means that I can make it so the effect that's being added is faded out on top of things. And that's just really cool. So obviously that is too powerful, but maybe I can bring the gain control down, which they're giving us access to here, and just bring that down. No, that's not really doing it. There's a hard cutoff. Let's turn off the hard cutoff. Let's turn up the threshold. Let's turn the gain back up. Yeah, I'm really not sure how to maybe invert it. Turn up the gain. There we go. Okay, so now you're seeing that, you know, I can kind of play around with these control settings over here. So let me just check my audio device, and if I'm using one here, audio input, there we go. So you see down behind my head that we're getting my audio signal. So that means I can go over here into Echo Trace, and in the gain function, I'm going to apply, right click on that, and I'm going to say link to audio spectrum extractor. Super simple, and now we can go over here and we can just set the bounds at which it's grabbing my voice. And so now you have control, if you're talking, over the echo trace function. And you can do a bunch of modifications to this signal. We won't get into that now. That'll be in a future video. But what you can see is that with no effort whatsoever, I was able to apply a generative thing. I was able to apply effect to that, and I was able to use my voice to control this thing that's being generated by code right now. So the ones that are built into Smode are fantastic, and there's a lot of them, and you can really have a lot of fun just playing with what's built into Smode. You could probably get away with doing that and create an entire body of work just with the stuff that's built into Smode. But if you go back to the websites that we were at, first this ISF one, if we go to, let's say, click on recent shaders, right? So there's all these different things that people have created that look really cool, and you can bring in and copy and paste these in. So it's not really hard to figure out how that works, in that you go and you click on one, and once it loads up, if you click on the source editor here, you will get all of the code. You right click on it, you copy it, you go into the other software and you paste it. Obviously this isn't worth copying, so we're not going to copy that one. So, but what we are going to do is we're going to go back to that one that we were looking at over on Shadertoy. Now, Shadertoy.com, this is a completely different thing than just ISF. And this website is, you know, a bunch of people creating a bunch of really great stuff. And if you go back to the homepage for Shadertoy, it takes a while to load. I will say that. Even on a fast computer, depending on how many thumbnails it's generating and stuff, it can take a little while. And so if you go and you hover over one of these, they'll start animating. Here's a Black Lives Matter one. It's really cool. I really like this Mobius Weave one, so let's take a look at it. If I just go Control-A, Control-C, Alt-Tab over into my program, click in the text here, delete that out, Control-V, Control-Enter, there we are. So we have a standalone timeline already attached to that shader, which is why it was already moving. If I hadn't clicked that prior to this, it would have maybe looked like nothing was happening, or it would be totally still. So while we're talking about it, over here on the Shadertoy object, you can see that it says there's a player object that's been added, and it has this little X1 over on the right. And if you click and you drag this, you can change the speed at which it plays back. And if you go into the negative, it'll move in the opposite direction. And by moving it, you know, really far forward, you can get crazy, crazy speeds out of this. And you can also just bring it down super slow and get something that's just really, really nice. Now, the nature of this particular design, it does loop. So, you know, technically this is a loop. And if you didn't want to have to use the GPU power to have this loop play back, you could bring it here into Smode, get it set up, export a video of it playing this back, and just trim it exactly where the loop point is, and that wouldn't be super hard. So that's a great way to get yourself some really nice, high quality, high def content. And again, spouting this out or NDI out into a program is also really handy. So you can do it within one computer, which, you know, my computer's powerful enough to do it. In the case that you wanted to offload it, you could just have Smode running on, let's say, a laptop with like a 1080 in it or something, and you could just NDI out of Smode and, you know, use that on your main Resolume computer and have access to a bunch. So speaking of access to a bunch, let's just hit that little blue arrow and size it back down here. And if I add another Shadertoy, super easy, you can just go click up where you already typed and just click enter, and it'll create another one. So the layer stack in Smode can be a little confusing. Whatever's on the bottom is what's in front. So that means that this little eyeball icon, which shows the visibility, if I turn it on and off, we can see that there's a new 2D layer on top of the old one that we were doing. So it's still running in the background, it's still running CPU. So if you want to turn that off to free up some CPU, just click the visibility and it won't continue calculating. If you leave it on and you have another one as well, you can fade between them by using the opacity sliders of both. And if you want to create an A/B situation, that's not super hard as well. You can make it so, you know, A is at 100%, and when you move the slider over to the other side, it brings one layer down while it brings the other layer up. So you can basically use this as a big palette of a ton of these different Shadertoy scenes, and there are so many, I'm not kidding you, that are just really, really great. And whatever parameters are exposed from it, you can automatically animate. If there aren't pre-exposed parameters, you can expose them yourself. And you can, if you become familiar with code, you can just go in and add adjustments. And if the code happens to be commented really well, which a lot of these Shadertoy ones in particular are commented really well because of the way that the people that made them think and work, they love sharing this stuff. So what we want to do is now find one more cool looking thing to bring in. So that last one was 2D and maybe not that great. So let's do Control A, Control C on a 3D one and bring that in here. Control V, Control Enter to make it solidify. And the one other thing worth pointing out that I've noticed is that the display in Smode itself is a little bit more contrasty, or I'm sorry, not Smode, in the browser. It's a little more dark and contrasty in the window that they show you in the browser, and when you bring it into Smode, it kind of washes things out and makes them look a little pastel. So the benefit of Smode is that it's like using Photoshop at the same time that you're using everything else. So if you're like, oh, I need like a brighten contrast layer on this, well, lucky for us, Smode has one. If I right click and I go down to stylize, let's see, color, and we go to brightness, contrast, and gamma, how easy is that? And then we can just bring down, let's say, the gamma a little bit, and then bring up the contrast a little bit. And so you have that full control over, you know, the color spectrum of the scene. And then just because I love it, let's just drop in a color, hue, saturation, and then I can just move that hue around and get totally different looks or have it shift through that or whatever, you know. So really cool, easy way to get different looks. And that's just adding these Photoshop layers on top of this Shadertoy, which is playing back in real time. So why isn't it moving? Have you been paying attention? It's because we didn't click play standalone. So I click on play standalone, and here we are flying through this tunnel. And if you remember as well, are you paying attention? You can go over to this little X1 over here, this player that got added to that Shadertoy, and you can slow down how fast it's flying through. You can go backwards. And again, this is completely procedural, real time, running off your GPU. It's not looping because of the nature of the code itself. And then this guy really commented it to all hell. And if you have never done this before, you could probably just go read through his stuff and find 87 different things that you want to change. Whoa. I don't know what's up with it doing that, but it's really crazy. So weird. So something weird's going on with the actual code on the math side when I'm slowing down the speed at which it's playing back. So something about the refresh rate is attached here in the code, and I'm kind of fuxing it up by doing that. But you know, if you add like time effects and things like that, ISF modifier, stylize, let's see what we got. Let's do slit scan. Some really nice looks really quick. Some really trippy shit. So I have a tendency to, add a certain array of effects to my stuff. But what I wanted to show you guys here without too much experimentation is that now we've got these multiple scenes and I'm able to really easily fade in between them, and they are both running off of my GPU, which is very, very powerful and constantly has extra headroom to do this stuff. So you will see that there are certain scenes that are really, really processor intensive, GPU intensive rather, and will not run very well or with other scenes running at the same time. So you'll have to basically do a little bit of trial and error to determine what scenes are actually going to work in a composition, which ones aren't. Like, just as an example, I would not use this one in a live setting or anything. Maybe I would render out a video clip of it, but probably not. I would have to change quite a bit about it. So before we move forward into anything else, I'll show you that this Shadertoy that we're looking at right now of the voxel scene, if we go into the channel 0 uniform and we go over to where this word uniform is, we can swap out what is currently in it. And uniform by default is just a color. So I could assign any color to this and it's going to change the texture of the blocks that you're looking at. And the reason I know that is because I've used a lot of this guy's scenes, and I know that what he does in iChannel 0 is he applies a texture that then is applied to every one of these cubes. And if we go and click on textures here in Shadertoy and I just swap out some, you'll see how easy it is to basically, apply different images to those cubes. So you can apply animated images to those cubes, you can apply videos to these cubes, and the different array of looks that you'll get really, really quickly, especially if you're adding post effects over in Smode, it's really, really great. So let's take a look at Smode, and just by dropping a checkerboard on there, we get a totally new look, right? And this is totally within my Roadhouse. I love using checkerboard type stuff and black and white stripes and all that. So if I take the size of that, unlock that, and bring it down to 0. Wow. Some really crazy shit going on. Just do 0 to 20. There we go. Now we have a bunch of black and white stripes on everything, just like my shirt. So that's pretty cool, and I can change the balance of how thick things are. And just these small changes to this texture are completely warping the experience that the viewer is having. And if you attach these things that, we're doing here to an audio FFT, for example, let's just do it because I'm talking about it. Right click, and we will say link to audio spectrum extractor. And now we will find that range again, and we'll bring it down, down, down. And now every time I talk, we are seeing that reflected in this GLSL code. So, tell me right there, just from watching this, that this isn't significantly better than using a video clip. I disagree if you say that video clips are better. And they come in just as useful. So don't think that me saying that this is better than a video clip means that anything has been detracted from video clips in general. I would say more specifically that moving forward and learning this as well is what's necessary. It's not about completely transitioning and replacing the old stuff. It's about a hybrid of both. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I think this is a great place to end it. And I'm going to do some advanced training as well on this. So keep your eyes out for a lot more of that. I'm going to be selling it on my Gumroad. And I'll do some private lessons with anybody that wants to learn this stuff. Just reach out and we can schedule a private lesson for a couple hours or whatever. Couple of sessions, whatever you'd like. And again, I appreciate every single one of my patrons so much. You are the only people that have access to this right now, and I'll eventually share more of this information out in the general public, but you guys get the heads up on it and can really get into the fun stuff. So I appreciate you so much. Let's talk soon. Mike Flex out.